Bonjour, mes amis. It is wonderful to be here with you tonight and to be talking about something that is very topical to us all, stress. Today's day and age, I feel like it's topic of many conversations, and we all have experience and awareness that we all handle it different, right? At a scene of a car crash, which is something horrible, some people thrive under that very immediate pressure. They jump into action, they know what to do, whereas others are a little bit more paralyzed by fear. And then we also see that in the long term sense, right? We know that some people, they build careers around thriving under that constant day to day pressure, whereas other people would crumble around that and need more, not a different paced career, right? Stress sits differently with us. And so, what we're going to be exploring this evening is how genes inform our body, our minds, as to how we both experience stress in that in the moment, as well as how do we manage it after the fact? How do we manage it, especially when it comes event after event after event? So, we'll be exploring how genes can inform that, and then how you can navigate that, how knowing your genes can shift that relationship. For those that have their DNA 360, I really encourage that you get it out because we're going to be speaking to several different genes. So, for some people, that might mean jumping into the portal and pulling up the mood and behavior report. For others, especially if you're looking for a quick way, that might mean going into the app, our DNA Way app. We're going to put a link in the chat so that you can access that. And today, just to get you ready, we're going to be in the mood and behavior report, and we're going to be exploring the genes COMT, that's COMT, BDNF, 5-HTT-LPR, that little alphabet soup, ADRA 2B, and clock. The person who's going to be exploring this glory, the HPA axis, stress, cortisol, all the fun in between, is our one and only Dr. Laura Varden, who's here this evening with me to talk all things stress, all things delight. Bonjour, Madel. How are you?
Hello and good evening. Nice to see you.
Hi, it's
Haven't
nice to see
paired up with you for a webinar in a beat.
It has been a while. And I'm looking forward to this conversation with you tonight because I think we both endure stress, but we also see it a lot within our clinic space, and we can really see the fallout of it, right? Stress isn't something that we just have to battle with our minds, right? It then implants within the body and it shifts health outcomes. So it becomes not just a how do you navigate life and how do you navigate your mental health. It also comes into the conversation of how is your body navigating inflammation and that daily wear and tear that cortisol can impart upon you.
Right. And did you know that up to 60% of individual differences in cortisol response are attributable to genetic factors?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think I love the conversation that we're going to have tonight because I think it's one of empowerment, right? Once you know how your body navigates the stress, you can then fine tune how you're going to be supporting yourself through stress so it doesn't have the impact, right? That 60% becomes a little less important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for those of you, I hope that you have filled out our poll because we
Hmm.
really like to lean in on your answers to be able to give you what it is you came here to get
Yeah.
out of these webinars. So, Vanny, can you please bring up the poll questions and answers and we'll take a look.
Hmm.
Thank you. All right, let me get this in my screen. Okay, so our first question was, how often do you feel burnt out by stress? And 40% of you said frequently. Um, Only 16% of you said almost always, and 33% said occasionally, and 11% said rarely. How interesting it would be to see the the moon behavior profiles of each individual and match
Yeah.
up to their answers, as well as looking at their lifestyle, which is so impactful, which we're going to dive a bit more into today. Um,
Hmm.
Unfortunately, no one said never. Of course, then again, I don't think you'd be living in this world if you had no stress at all. But then again, the question was more on burnt out by stress. And that's really the key, because
Hmm.
we all have to experience some stress. And we'll talk about the benefits of that and how that can actually help the
Yeah.
body, that hormetic stress.
Hmm.
So our second question was, what is your biggest stress trigger? And it looks like the top choice was relationships and family. Isn't that interesting? As we are coming upon Thanksgiving next month.
Yeah.
So I think that this can be very helpful, for those of you who do find, relationships, family, when you're all coming together for that meal. Actually, Canadian Thanksgiving was yesterday. So
It
I guess we're
was.
kind of bypassing our
Yeah.
friends out there.
Yeah.
But as Americans, maybe that there's some things that we talk about tonight, or give you some
Mhm.
hacks that you can practice next month when all the family comes over.
Yeah.
So our second most, our biggest trigger was lack of sleep. And boy, I'll
Oh,
tell you what,
audience.
yes, it's the tolerance level goes when it
Yeah.
comes to lack of sleep. Absolutely. And my heart goes out to all of those new moms, which, I've got a couple in my family, my daughter and my daughter-in-law, with,
Hmm.
little babies they have that are, either just learning how to do life, or that are going teething,
Ooh.
and, really disrupting that sleep. It definitely can affect the stress. Our next major stress trigger was work, occupational stress, followed up by other. Please add to chat, and let's see if anybody who put in what. So it looks like some of the things in the chat: financial, relationship, general, health, all play a role. Yes, they absolutely do. Clutter, lack of organization, probably in their environment, definitely
Yeah.
can be a factor. And interesting to see that that the lowest percentage one was financial pressure. Usually that's one of the top. Um, so nice to see that's not such a major issue with our audience this evening.
Mm.
So our third question: which area would you most like to improve to manage stress better? Number one, sleep and recovery. And
I'm
I
glad
said
I'm glad we're talking about clock tonight, right? I think clock will be very helpful to
yes,
that. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I've said that the difference uh, between oh, despair and hope is a good night's sleep. So, and that works
Sometimes.
because despair is often, working in with a lot of stress and pressure.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that's
Yeah.
always a great foundational thing. That
Mhm.
was followed up by mindfulness and relaxation. I think a lot of us, we really have lost that way of just slowing down,
Yeah. Yeah.
taking a beat to be able to just quiet the mind, even though mine always chatters all the time, but sometimes it's shh, just have some silence around me and to relax.
Yeah.
That was followed up by nutrition and supplements, then work-life balance, and finally, coming in last, exercise and fitness. Very interesting.
Mm.
Our fourth question: which statement best matches your belief? Number one belief by 60%, both play an equal role. The both meaning stress resilience is mostly genetic and stress resilience is mostly lifestyle environment. 24% said stress resilience is mostly lifestyle environment. No one said that stress
Mm.
resilience is mostly genetic. So, really interesting. I love how informed our audience is,
Hmm.
because absolutely both play such an important role.
Yeah.
16% said not sure, but of course, then again, this is also a great reason to be here, because we're going to
Hmm.
explain to you in more detail how each plays such a significant role. And our final question: what would you like most to gain from this session? Number one, understanding my genetic predisposition, which is wonderful because we're going to be diving into the genes that Dr. Kosterman has mentioned,
Yeah.
a couple others, and explaining how that can work, and then how you can manipulate them to be in your benefit. The next runner-up was tools for long-term resilience, which is perfect because we are definitely going to be talking about that as well. And then there was pretty much even percentage of science-backed insights on cortisol and burnout and practical
Mm,
stress management hacks.
yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, we are going to be covering all those things tonight. Thank you so much,
Mm,
everyone, for filling out the poll. We really appreciate that.
yeah. Yeah. So I think where we want to start is really acknowledging and talking about that stress, obviously, as we mentioned at the top, isn't experienced in the same way by everyone. There's definitely common neurotransmitters and hormones involved, but genes will really influence how those pathways are exercised, as well as a lot of the interventions that you bring in. And so let me ground this a little bit because we want to start talking about the genes that influence how you experience stress. Oftentimes, when we talk about stress, we always hear about cortisol, right? Cortisol is this thing that rises, right, Dr. Varden, in response to stress. And in the short term, there's a lot of benefit to cortisol, right? It's something that gets the body ready to be responding. It shifts you away from that rest and digest space into that action space, into that let me have my brain, my attention, my focus ready. Now, the struggle and where burnout tends to happen is not only when we've over exercised that pathway, but audience, remember that when you're exercising a muscle, you make it stronger. And when we make that stress pathway exceptionally strong, that it becomes almost the default of the body. Do you agree, Dr. Varden?
Oh, absolutely. And we get into that pattern of a repetitiveness of how we react to
Mhm.
our environment around us, the sensitivity of
Mhm.
that. It's basically enhancing what you may genetically be predisposed to.
Yeah.
And we can tend to fall victim to that instead of empowering ourselves, going, okay, hey, this is the way my genes are. I'm seeing how I may be reacting to certain things. How can I start making changes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's start exploring the genes because, audience, remember that when cortisol happens, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? It's not just happening alone. There's a lot of opportunity of different enzymes, different neurotransmitters, different brain factors that can come in and shift not only how that cortisol bump is happening when you're stressed, but also how ingrained, how strongly you exercise and reinforce that muscle, right? So, Dr. Varden, do you want to, would you like to kick us off? Maybe do you want to kick us off with COMT? So, again, audience, pull up either your report, pull up your DNA app, DNA Way app. So close. We're in the mood and behavior section, and we're going to be looking at COMT. Okay.
Okay, so I wanted to just kind of do some highlights because I think, after we highlight some of the genes that you had mentioned, basically, hey, this is what they do, but then start diving in a little bit deeper about how they work into the HPA axis. So we're going to get to that. But first, the DNA 360 genes that we're highlighting, COMT, okay, catecholamine O methyltransferase. So this affects dopamine clearance. It really starts to influence the baseline anxiety or that worrier tendency, especially if you are slower at that clearance. So when we're talking about slow clearance, we're talking about the A allele. So if you have an AA presentation, that means that you have a slow COMT. You are slower at that clearance. If you have a GG, that means you are fast. The next one being BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. And this really deals with neural resilience, that uh, feed for the brain. It really helps, the neurons, that replenishment of neurons. It has the ability for that recovery from stress exposures. And people with a GG version have an optimal presentation, and people with an A allele in there, that's a little bit more of a dysregulated version. Our next gene is the 5-HTT-LPR. This is an indel. So you're either going to have an S for short, an L for long, or some combination thereof. Now, this really works with serotonin transport. And the higher stress sensitivity that you may have under adversity depends on the type of presentation that you have. Now, I know we've joked about so many times that I happen to have the SS version. That's the short version. It is dysregulated, genetically speaking, but I've turned it into a superpower.
And I attest to that. It is your superpower, and I am very grateful for your superpower.
Well, I appreciate that. And I honor your LL.
I'm a strong
So
LL.
absolutely. So these presentations don't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's just recognizing what you have and then adjusting, changing the context for your best optimal self. Getting into the next gene, ADRA2B. So that's ADRA2 and then B is in Bravo. This is also an indel, insertion deletion. Okay. So you're either going to have an I for an insertion or a D for a deletion or some sort of combination thereof. Now, this really works for memory. It works for that. It's the adrenergic or the adrenaline noradrenaline receptor. Okay. So the stronger the emotional memory, higher stress that can echo, versus being able to just let it go. So, that's something, the I would be considered a regular desensitization. The DD would be considered a dysregulated desensitization. That's where you would have that stronger echo, that more emotional remembrance of a situation or an event. Excuse me. And our last one would be clock that we're going to be focusing on. And this really deals with exactly what you think, circadian rhythm. And if you are dysregulated, so first of all, the clock, the T allele would be the optimal or the regular sleep wake cycle presentation. If you have a C allele in there, even if it's a CT, there is some dysregulation. And when you have some misalignment with your clock gene in your system, because every cell has its circadian rhythm, when there's misalignment, that can worsen the stress recovery. So again, it doesn't mean that you can't recover from stress. It just means, hey, be aware, so that way you can implement tools to increase the recovery, the way, how quickly you can recover. Because I'll say, I have a CT version. I am dysregulated, but it's using those tools that help me get over things a little bit easier, especially with that clock dysregulation. So remember, genes do not mandate or say you will have burnout, okay? They can predispose, yes, but remember that context matters.
Yeah, it does. And in my clinical practice, as well as just my own personal experience of my health and my own stress management, I find knowing my genes has helped me plan better and respond better to stress, both in the moment and then separately when I'm looking down, like, oh, I have this thing coming. I know I'm going to be under stress for a while.
Right.
It helps me educate myself. How do I sustain myself in that moment? as well in the longer term. I'm seeing a little bit in the chat people asking where clock is. I like our SSs out there that are very observant. Clock actually appears in our sleep report. So for those that are in the app or in the portal, what you want to do is come out a level. Instead of being in mood and behavior reporting, you actually want to go to the sleep report. And so in the sleep report, namely that system summary, you will see where your clock presentation is. So thank you to the SSs out there, the 5-HTP SSs out there who caught that. I appreciate you. So yeah, so audience, again, remember, knowing your presentation will let you know how you're going to be experiencing that stress. So let's, if we're bringing it back to the top, those that are the slower comps, right? Those that don't clean up their dopamine and their noradrenaline really quickly, you know that you're going to be experiencing that stress for a little bit longer. You're quite literally marinating in it longer. You're not sucking out those hormones, or sorry, those neurotransmitters. We're close. And so with that awareness, that shifts in the moment how how long that feeling is going to, you're going to experience that. And then maybe how you might want to interrupt that experience, right? Based on how you want to be responding to that stress, right?
Wonderful advice. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's shift it over to diving in, I should say, diving in a little bit deeper.
Hmm.
When we're talking about cortisol, okay, remember this being your body's primary stress hormone. And obviously, like any good tool, it can help, it can harm. A hammer is very, very useful for building things, putting things together. You just don't want to be hitting your thumb. So, in any case, it really is important that there is balance. And I wanted to dive a little bit into the way that our body works in the respect of what I had said earlier, the HPA axis. Okay, so let's imagine that your body is this advanced command center monitoring and responding to the environment. So the HPA axis, this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Okay, so this is your body's stress command center. So when a stress signal arrives, like an approaching deadline or a sudden loud noise, or something like Dr. Kosterman had mentioned earlier, well, this is what happens. So the hypothalamus, okay, which is in the middle of your brain, your command center's alarm system in the brain. It detects the stressor and sends out a chemical messenger called corticotropin releasing hormone, or CRH. All right. Then you have the pituitary gland, just right underneath that. It's a little tiny thing. I want you to think of this as the control tower. So it receives the CRH and sends out adrenocorticotropin hormone. There we go, ACTH.
All the words.
Yes. And it sends that out into the bloodstream. Okay. So that way it can get to its next point, which are the adrenals, the adrenal glands. These are your responders, and they are located right on top of the kidneys. Okay. They look like little triangle things sitting on top of the kidneys. So they pick up the ACTH and release cortisol. Now remember, this is the key stress hormone, and it is preparing your body for a sustained response, whether it's increase in alertness or energy mobilization, anything like that. And then after the danger passes, a negative feedback signal returns to the brain telling, okay, system, power down, let's restore that balance.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great summary of it. And audience, the genes that we went through, and namely the neurotransmitters or the brain factors that those genes influence, all of those are going to be elements that can either accentuate this pathway and make it stronger, make your the muscle memory a little bit stronger, or they can be things that calm it down a little bit and be like, great, now that the stress is past, let's go back down to our base mode quickly. Be resilient to that stress, right? So knowing your genes here, right? So for example, let's look at serotonin. Okay. So serotonin, very much within pop science, within the media, has been categorized as this happy hormone, right? If you have enough, you're happy. If you don't have enough, you're sad. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but I'd like to reposition serotonin as effectively a hug, right? Serotonin is this neurotransmitter that gives us a sense of calm. Okay. And so if you have access to a lot of serotonin, there's a better sense of calm in the moment compared to not having access to it. And so there's a little bit of low grade agitation. I'm not talking anxiety or depression. I'm talking a little bit of feeling on edge, right? So when we know that stress comes, when that cortisol bumps us up into that sense of what's going on, I better respond. Once that moment has passed, serotonin is one of the elements that says, okay, body, I'm going to give you this calm down, right? And also ensures that we start to bring that nervous system down. The more cortisol, the more stress we expose ourselves to, it actually decreases our access and our ability to leverage serotonin, right? It's this very intricate feedback loop. As much as serotonin can help dampen the cortisol response, excessive continual exposure to cortisol is going to reduce how much serotonin we have. So, for my SSs out there, right? This does mean that you naturally don't have that high access to serotonin. And so, knowing that, we have to think through other ways, not only to support that serotonin, but to ensure after the fact, after that stress, we have something that gives us that sense of calm and we're not exclusively relying on serotonin. Dr. Varden, do you agree as the representative SS?
Yes, very much so. And again, it's implementing techniques. First of all, it's you have to have the awareness. You
Mm-hmm.
have to be aware of the way that you are reacting to things, and you want to shift that into a response,
Mm-hmm.
because responding to something versus reacting to something, the difference between them is you have thoughtfulness and control in a response,
Mm-hmm.
deciding how you are going to go. Does it negate or stop any particular initial emotions, or you actually feeling it? No. But taking that beat, taking that moment to decide, how am I going to respond? What am I going to do? Am I going to implement a particular technique that I can
Mm-hmm.
use in the moment, so that way I don't overreact, or so that it is not damaging myself? That is very empowering.
Yeah. Yeah. Audience, just like we said kind of at the beginning of this, that cortisol and your stress response is a muscle, in that if you overexercise it, it becomes the default. That ramped up activity becomes the default. There's an element of, the more you practice some of these stress intervention techniques, you're strengthening those muscles so they can also be a default and a big interrupter, right? When you compare two muscles, the stronger one is going to win. And so we want to look at, how do we build up those muscles that dampen the cortisol response, but don't completely dismiss it. Because I don't think cortisol is all bad. Dr. Varden, why don't we talk about why cortisol isn't as horrible, isn't the villain of this movie that we're making it out to be?
Well, okay. So I was going to get into this a little bit later about, the benefits of cortisol.
Hmm.
But, if we really want to start getting into, hey, there are definite key benefits to cortisol. Again, uh, I mean, our body is there to do the job it needs to do for survival, for healing, as we are always in a healing state. It's trying to protect you, even though you may think it's not. It really is. So, even though that cortisol is portrayed, as this villain, all right, it promotes so many good things. For example, it does help to regulate stress and energy. I mean, it's the stress molecule. It it actually provides a sustained, kind of like a second wave of a stress response, because initially, when there's a loud noise, like I had mentioned earlier in the HPA axis, adrenaline is the first thing that gives you that initial surge. Okay, but it where the HPA axis of the process that I had already explained, that's that second wave. It helps the body stay alert. It maintains the energy to cope with ongoing challenges by stimulating glucose release for the brain and muscle energy. That's called
Mm.
gluconeogenesis. Okay, so you don't have to eat sugar to have glucose. Your liver actually makes it. And in everyday life, appropriate cortisol rises and enhances alertness, motivation, focus, supporting both cognitive and physical performance. This is very important. It helps to maintain blood sugar, metabolism, okay?
Mm.
Because it uses cortisol actually helps regulate how the body uses carbohydrates, how it uses proteins and fats for fuel. It helps to stabilize blood sugar levels.
Yeah.
So,
It'd be the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning, right? It is that first thing that kicks us up and gives us that, oh, hello, good morning.
yeah. Speaking of which, Dr. Kosterman, could
Yes,
you
ma'am.
give a brief little summary of diurnal cortisol patterns?
Yeah. Yeah. So, audience, cortisol serves many purposes, right? The body's really cool. And then it's like, oh, I have this one thing that does a great job. I'm also going to use it for another job. So we know that when there's a stressful moment, when we see that proverbial tiger, noradrenaline, cortisol, these things come to be. The body also uses cortisol to wake us up and to give us energy throughout the day. So, when after you've gone through your sleep, ideally 8 hours, we're going to have to talk about sleep because, audience, we heard you. You're not sleeping well, but let's pretend we're in a little bubble, a happy world where everyone's sleeping fine. As we approach the morning hours, there is going to be a spike of cortisol, and that is what wakes us up, and that is healthy. Right? That is what kicks us off for the day. And so we get that first spike, within that hour of waking. And it's something, audience, as we talk about sleep support, we actually want to accentuate that first cortisol bump of the day. So, what does accentuating that means? That means when you're first waking up, ideally you're not lying in bed and instead you're doing something to gently pump that cortisol up. Be that a little bit of movement, be that some light exposure, all these things are going to help with sleep. Okay. The next time we see cortisol during our day is going to be early afternoon, so slightly after lunch, right? This is when the body's like, oh, okay, we're still far away from bedtime. We better have some energy, and we're going to see another little bit of a bump. Okay. And then we expect it to start falling throughout the day. There's a lot of other neurotransmitters and hormones that are involved in this, but when we just look at cortisol, we see those two bumps, the morning one being the biggest, there being a slight guy after lunch, and then we expect it to descend so that as we get closer to bed, right, it's not as present and we can really shift into that rest state and go to bed, not have that agitation. And this is why, to an extent, we need to be mindful of stressful things and attention grabbing things before bed, right? Because body can't really tell the difference between trauma on a TV show and, a tiger in the woods. And so there's an element of when we see something crazy graphic on TV, it's going to bump that cortisol up and shift our experience of bedtime. So knowing that cortisol is not your enemy, it's something that helps us throughout the day as well as something that responds to stress is good to know. And it's something we want to strategically support and not alienate as kind of something that destroys our body and our worlds, because that's not true. It's a helpful thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. If we're talking about other benefits of cortisol, it supports blood pressure, cardiovascular function,
Mhm.
because it helps to maintain vascular tone and fluid balance, because cortisol contributes to steady blood pressure. And without adequate cortisol, both blood pressure and cardiac efficiency, it can drop.
Mhm.
And that can lead to symptoms like dizziness or fatigue. Okay, so small fluctuations in cortisol throughout the day help the cardiovascular system adapt to postural changes, standing up so you don't get dizzy and fall over. Kind of like, unfortunately, several people have POTS, postural
Mhm.
orthostatic tachycardia. And it helps with daily activity. So this is really working into what Dr. Kusterman was talking about in that diurnal, pattern. that, there are times that you need to have these fluctuations giving you this energy, and it helps to support these other bodily functions, and, other
Mhm.
necessary things for life. You know, Another aspect is inflammation. I know that's a huge thing on everybody's mind. These chronic conditions that are inflammation, a foundation where inflammation is that main contributor. Well, cortisol tempers inflammation and autoimmunity by downregulating pro-inflammatory cytokines and prevent overactivation of the immune system,
Mhm.
except when it starts shifting into chronic. Then it starts moving in the other direction where it's increasing inflammation, where it can cause those issues by other
Yeah.
downstream problems.
Yeah.
It's really important, that you have that balance, because with the immune system, cortisol helps to prompt what we call apoptosis, which is the programmed cell death, of like overactive T cells, and reduces antibody overproduction. It's very important for that turnover. So that way we have healthy immune systems. And
Mm.
this really helps to balance effects that prevents tissue damage while supporting recovery from injury or infection. And, again, working in through the sleep allows the body to do this as well through that,
Mhm.
circadian rhythm aspect, that diurnal aspect that Dr. Kosterman was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of dysregulation and the chronicity, that drawn out sense of stress is really what happens when we are either flattening or accentuating a lot of these natural body patterns, right? The body likes this variation, but within a smaller window. And so, audience, since our goal is always to the end of application of our genes, Dr. Varden and I are now going to jump into how do we look at stress modifiers, especially in light of what we know from your DNA 360, what we know of your genes. And I'd encourage you, as you're hearing it, I want you to hear it through two different ears, right? We all know stress is inevitable. You're going to see the tiger. And then there's also going to be moments where you're like, cool, I know this is going to be a stressful month and I'm going to see many different tigers, whatever your tiger is. So we want to think through how do we build up muscle that helps us calm down that stress response? And then when that stress response comes, what's in our toolkit? What are the muscles we built? What are the supplements we have, right? We're going to talk about some black label supplements. What are those things that we can do to help us through those moments when we know we're going to be seeing a bunch of little tigers? Yeah. All right. Dr. Varden, since it's audience demand, why don't we start with sleep?
So, for sleep, okay. So, what you want to do, first of all, you want to get into good sleep habits. So, this really works into your sleep hygiene. Good sleep starts in the morning, and this actually works in with your BDNF, with the clock, with your cry 1 gene, with all of that. You want to get sunlight in the morning. Get it started. This helps to set your clock gene, even if you are dysregulated. It lets your body know, hey, it's daytime. My cortisol levels should start peaking. And because, again, what Dr. Kosterman said, cortisol and these genes do not exist in a vacuum. They are affected and influenced by other genes and by the things that you do, your environment, because your environment affects how your genes are being expressed. So get some sunlight, okay?
Mhm.
And then as your day goes through, make sure you get some movement, okay? You want to get yourself tired. You don't want to be static or sitting all the time. And as you are preparing for bed, make sure your lighting, you want to have dimmer lighting. You don't want glaring lights, kind of like I have right now in blue light. The sun's already gone down, but This is why I'm wearing, my Viva Rays, my blue light blockers,
Yeah.
to help protect my eyes and tell my body, hey, don't be so strongly affected,
Yeah.
by these bright lights telling me it's daylight, because my body, my brain doesn't realize that,
Mhm.
it's just taking in these wavelengths. So you want to start turning those lights down. You want to get off of your devices, not be doom scrolling right before bed. Okay. Have your
Mhm.
room a little bit cooler. Be sleeping in a dark room. Okay. Try completely black if you can. Have a set schedule. Do the regular sleep hygiene. And we have done numerous sleep focused webinars that I highly encourage you, that if sleep is an issue for you, please go take a look at and watch some of those webinars to give you more in-depth, more precise tools in that toolkit.
Yeah.
Okay. But you want to do your QQRT: quantity, quality, regularity, and timing.
Mhm.
So the quantity and quality, sometimes you don't have as much control over, but the regularity and timing, yes, you do. So
Mhm.
going to bed at the same time every night, waking up at the same time every morning, even on weekends, even on holidays. But that can help reset your clock, your
Yeah.
circadian rhythm, to make it work for you.
Yeah. So I think audience, if you have a CT or a CC, you tend to be, this is for your clock gene, you tend to be of those that are going to struggle a little bit more with ensuring an easy, smooth circadian rhythm. You're going to have to put a little bit more effort into it. And so be mindful of that when stress hits, because we all know when we're stressed, we're tempted to skip some sleep. And for you in particular, that disruption of your circadian rhythm is going to be all the more difficult to recover from. And audience, I will say one other thing before we move on to other genes and before this cat disrupts me too much. Um, Study after study says that assuming there's nothing pathologically wrong, sleep hygiene, everything that Dr. Varden just went over, is the best way to support sleep. If you've tried out sleep hygiene for a few weeks and you're not seeing a budge and you gave it a good, solid boy or girl scout effort, reach out to a clinician, reach out to a provider to understand what's up. Sometimes there can be things outside of our awareness and control, like hormones. I'm talking to all our menopausal ladies out
I
there.
was just going to say.
Sometimes it can be things like a low grade infection or inflammation. All of these things can actually give us an insomnia and worsen stress, worsen our ability to recover from it. So if you've given a full scout effort towards sleep for several weeks and you're not seeing that needle budge, reach out to a clinician. Feel free to reach out to us because we can really bring in the genes for that. I think it's important because you don't want to be struggling with sleep by yourself, because without sleep, you're not properly setting your body up to manage stress.
And we're also able to look at your situation, your environment, ask the right questions to find out if there's something that is causing a problem, in
Mm-hmm.
your environment. It could be that. But again, it really is a Sherlock Holmes type of situation that is as personalized to you as your genetics.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah. All right. Let's explore a few more things and then audience, we're going to get to the questions because we saw a lot coming in from you. Um let's talk about exercise. It sounds like if I recall from the poll correctly, it's not necessarily the top thing on our audience's toolbox list. And that's okay. Audience, I will confess I am amongst you. I'm like, exercise. Psh, if I have to give something up, it's going to be that. And Dr. Varden's going to come in with some science to tell me I'm a fool and that I should be exercising because it's a really good thing for stress and all these other things that I wish I didn't know.
Actually, you're absolutely right.
I don't like being right. Let's hear it.
Because there are studies and science has said that regular rhythmic movement, okay, so we're talking walking, swimming, yoga, anything like that,
Dancing.
enhances dancing, love dancing, enhances cortisol pulsativity. Okay, remember we said about the fluctuations of cortisol being very important, very beneficial, and that improves resilience to acute stress. Both overtraining and inactivity impair that rhythm. So it's not like you have to go training as if, you're
Mm.
going to be running a marathon, or, that, for, NBA or something like that. If that's not you, that's fine. But you do have to have some sort of movement. And then, you know, the thing is that with physical exercise, we cannot forget about nutrition, that nutritional stability, because eating balanced meals with complex carbohydrates and proteins that can help to stabilize your glucose
Mhm.
and cortisol output. Nutrients like magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, your B vitamins, these buffer stress reactivity by supporting adrenal and mitochondrial function. So they really work together,
Yeah.
because it's going to be difficult, to do some of these exercises if you have zero energy. So
Yeah.
it really kind of goes hand in hand that you have to eat well to be able to move well, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And remember, I said about good sleep hygiene, it's good to have the exercise and movement so you can make your body tired, so you can,
Mhm.
burn off,
Yeah.
some of that energy, so that way you can sleep.
Yeah. Audience, I think something to be, I like that Dr. Varden kind of introduced this idea that it doesn't have to be intensive, like I'm going to go run a marathon. And why I think this is really important is that stress shouldn't only be navigated in the mind. I'll be honest, stress is rarely something you can think your way out of. It's something though that your body can give a lot of feedback to your brain to calm down. What do I mean? Your nervous system, yes, is rooted in your head and in your spine, but it extends out to quite literally every ounce of your body. And so the more you move your body and the more you engage, that could mean muscular exercise. That could simply mean pressure exercises. That could mean breath exercises. The more there's even that gentle movement brought in, you're sending nervous signal systems from the body back to the brain, back to the spine that are saying, we're good, you can calm down. Part of, especially for those that don't have the great ADRAs, don't have the great 5-HTT LPRs, don't have the great BDNFs, right? For those people, signals from the body become all the more important in that how do we calm down and how do we prepare for example, that month of stress? Having that signaling outside of serotonin, outside of BDNF, outside of cortisol becomes really, really important. Movement, touch, all of those guys are really good triggers to tell body to calm down.
Tapping,
Mm,
emotional freedom technique, uh, that type of, relaxation, the calming, almost like that self hug,
mm,
even isometric, just tensing, relax, tense, relax, also helps to give other signals to the nervous system to help re-regulate it.
mm.
So that can be very helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And last but not least, I think before we transition into questions, one thing I want to talk about is just having some supplements on hand. Um, I think sometimes, especially when we talk about stress, we have this idea of we have to think through it. Maybe we even have to eat through it or exercise through it. And sometimes that's just not reasonable, right? Sometimes we do need to reach for something, and this is not permission to go reaching for that glass of wine. Instead, I want you to think through some other messages that can come into body. My favorite, especially when I think about reaching for things, tends to be my plant friends, tends to be a tea or can be a little capsulized supplement. So, for example, Deep Calm is one that I absolutely love because it has a combination of herbs and herbal extracts, all of which give messages to our nervous system through the GI tract to take a breath. Take a breath. And so, is this something per se that you want to be doing every single day, all the time? Absolutely not. It loses its efficacy. So close. Words are working tonight. Instead, though, think of this as something that in the moment when proverbial ish has hit the fan, you know you have your exercise techniques, you know you have your breathing techniques, you know your genes of how you're going to respond, but sometimes you do need that little extra hug. And so I'd really encourage you to be mindful of that and to have some things on hand because stress happens, right? Ish happens, stress happens. And so, yeah, I see Dr. Barden nodding. Yeah, if guys, if you're looking for deep calm, one of my more favored recipes. It's something that a few of the founders supported with. It's on our website. We'll put a link to it in the chat for those that were curious. Yeah. Yeah. All right, Dr. Varden. Um, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we shift into questions and answers?
Well, I did want to just state a couple other things that
Yes.
can be very helpful. Um, and the first thing, really dealing with cognitive and emotional regulation. Okay.
Mm,
Because, excuse me, uh, that cognitive reframing of challenges
mm,
is very important because it really aims to shift stress perception from
mm,
threat to growth. It helps to decrease the HPA activation and to normalize neuroimmune signaling. And
mm,
this work, excuse me, this
mm,
works into what I was talking about earlier on shifting from reacting to responding. All right. But it's having that understanding. And it also helps to take little micro breaks. We had
mm,
mentioned this a little bit earlier about mindfulness moments, very short pauses in the day to restore that prefrontal, limbic balance and prevent cumulative cortisol elevations, really to just kind of, bring it down and just take a beat. And, it's something that I was looking in the questions that Michael said lifestyle recommendations, avoiding unnecessary situations and people who trigger your anxiety. Absolutely.
mm.
Being aware of what your triggers are. Avoid
Boundaries. Yeah.
exactly. Record instances where symptoms of anxiety occur and why you feel
Yeah.
anxious about that situation. This is really empowering yourself to recognize that. And I love this last one that he said is realize that you are not alone. Many people
Mm,
struggle with anxiety issues. And, you know, honestly, more people than you realize suffer with anxiety issues. They just
mm,
don't know how to talk about it or think that, this is a moral failing. And
mm,
it's not. We need to have more of that social connection to be able to discuss these things because I know that one of the things that in our poll questions, relationships and families being a
mm,
trigger of anxiety, but yet in the same respect or the other side of the coin, supportive relationships help to modulate cortisol reactivity and really enhance the oxytocin, you know,
mhm,
flows of love and connection and
mhm.
decrease those stress circuits.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to reframe and knowing those people who trigger you staying away from them and finding those that give you those oxytocin hits and
Yeah.
spending more time with them.
Yeah.
That's important. But then again, when you get at a Thanksgiving table and you kind of don't have a choice, knowing what other tools can I implement to be able
Hmm.
to be a calm,
Yeah.
self and not
Yeah.
have my cortisol spike too much.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think, Dr. Varden, that's a good pro star tip in particular for people who have poor BDNF. We've noticed that people with poor BDNF tend to be very ruminative. What does that mean? A thought gets planted in your head and you hamster wheeling that thought ad nauseum. It's this idea of if I had done it that way, if I had done it that way, and you're going through that decision tree in absolutely incredible ways and you get lost in that decision tree. And that is such a beautiful point where friends and community can come in and be like, girl, you need to calm down. You have exercised every thought out there. You need to calm down. And they help ground you, right? I find in particular for people who tend to go on that hamster wheel, one of the tools they can bring in is like, great, I have this thought. Let me soundboard it with someone instead of going through the incredible decision tree in my mind. So, Dr. Varden, I really love that you brought in this idea of community and friendship because we know bodies respond to that, both on that intellectual conversational level, but also that physiologic level, right? Bodies respond to the calmness of another. So, if you're having a conversation with someone who's calm, your body starts to adopt that physiology as well, especially if you're close with them. Partners, they do physiology matching, which is really neat. It's not something they personally do. But if you love someone and you're in family relationship or romantic relationship with someone and they're calm, your physiology will start to mirror that. So,
Yeah, mirror
neat.
neurons. And they've done studies on family dynamics, the energy. If one is
Mhm.
totally stressed out, it can actually filter over and cause the rest of the family members to get stressed.
Mhm.
So, in the same respect, I love how you said if a family member is calm, it is just as influential that the rest can then be calm. And
Mhm.
you were saying about having close friends, that soundboarding, being able to work off of each other. And I see that Michael had another question that I had mentioned earlier about my SSO, my
Mhm.
5-HTTL-PR gene, which works with serotonin transport. The S meaning short or dysregulated presentation, how that can be slightly problematic, which we've talked about, how I turned it into a superpower. He said, I didn't explain what that superpower was, and I left you guys hanging. Well, I don't want to leave you hanging. So, how I shifted that is one of the things that the 5-HTTLPR does when it's short. Well, serotonin can also be agnostic in the fact that uh, incoming stimuli, okay, it's hard to prioritize it. And so, therefore, everything has all the same importance and it can be overwhelming and it can
Mhm.
actually contribute to burnout and overwhelm.
Mhm.
So, that's the problematic side of it. The superpower side of it is that all things can be important. So, therefore, you pay attention to everything. It is paying attention to details,
Mhm.
catching every little thing that a lot of other people can
Mhm.
overlook or miss, or not say, oh, that's not important. I'm not going to pay
Mhm.
attention to that.
Mhm.
So, yes, I am one where I will catch every I being dotted, T being crossed, every little thing that may be, missed, I will catch. So I have used that to my benefit, especially as a scientist and areas of work where I have to be very detail oriented. And and I've also learned how to go, okay, don't worry about that. Takes more energy, but
Mhm.
again, it's a practice, a daily practice. So
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. And I think it's a daily practice, it's a daily awareness. And then that gets us into how do we better manage it. So I next want to talk through Pia, Paya had a question for us. And their question was, does NOS 1, 2, and 3 affect stress? So let's ground against what exactly this is. So NOS is nitric oxide synthase.
synthase.
Thank you. So close. We got there, kind of. So this is a suite of enzymes that what it will do within the body, namely within the cardiovascular system, creates nitric oxide, releases it in response to very physical stresses and sometimes even more that cognitive cortisol stress, and it will help actually relax blood vessels. Okay, and the importance of relaxing them is to help reduce blood pressure. Remember how we talked about cortisol? When that spikes, when that goes up, your blood pressure is going to go up a little bit too, because the goal is either to wake you up or to respond to a tiger. And so some that increase of blood pressure will help that. So sometimes what can happen in particular with people who don't produce a lot of nitric oxide, and you can jump into your DNA 360. This is going to be in the cardiovascular section. There's a section specific to blood pressure. You'll see your result there. For people who aren't great at creating their nitric oxide, right? It means that their ability to handle blood pressure, and there's a few things that go into it, so I don't want to pretend it's only one gene or one element, but their ability to handle blood pressure isn't great. And so what can happen is remember that the brain, sorry, takes a lot of cues from the body to understand, am I in a safe position? And one of those things is blood pressure. So if you spike in blood pressure and it's not going down, body to an extent receives that as a stress, and it kind of furthers that experience, that cortisol chain, that stress chain. So the idea is if you're not relaxing, right, that blood vessel to reduce the blood pressure, it can be perceived as a sense of stress, right? And so, and the flip of this is true, right? You can actually lower your blood pressure by lowering your stress, by doing some breathing exercises. So, does this influence it? Absolutely, it does. And so, understanding how you can gain better control of your blood pressure through diet, exercise, and other means that you might want to be discussing with your doctor based on how high your blood pressure is, that absolutely feeds into stress. And it's something I'd encourage you exploring, because not all stress comes necessarily from the outside world. Sometimes it comes from within the body. And so, Pia, however that might be said, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's an important point. Yeah. All right. Dr. Varden, Madeline has our next question. Oh, I love this question, actually. I think it touches on our DNA aging. Madeline is saying, does your lifestyle that influences sleeping patterns actually change your DNA during the lifetime?
And, this is a very interesting and wonderful question. I agree. But there's a couple aspects to this. So the first being your actual DNA, like what we present in your DNA 360, that doesn't change. No matter what you do, from the time you were conceived to the time that you die, your DNA is the same. Actually, even after, because your cells are still there, your bones, the DNA, if someone came in and some archaeologist came in, your DNA would still be the same. So, no, that doesn't change. What changes is the expression of those genes. Because again, it's not, it is like turning a gene on and off, okay? But I want you to think of it more like a dimmer switch. So your gene, you have this much space to work within. So you can either upregulate it, downregulate it within this amount of space. And it's finding the optimal position of expression for that gene within the pathway, within the constellation of genes for, whatever the case may be, whatever the particular pathway is. Now, there is an aspect of your lifestyle, sleeping patterns influencing, well, not necessarily changing, but influencing the DNA through DNA methylation. Methyl groups can attach to DNA at certain spots throughout the DNA, okay? And methyl groups generally silence genes, okay? And there are certain patterns that our DNA gene premium test looks at that correlate with aging of certain tissues, cells, and your body. And that's what we're talking about, as far as patterns and changes of the DNA. It's not actually changing the actual genes, it's changing the expression, whether they are silenced or how they are expressing. So I hope that gives it a better understanding of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the answer is to Dr. Varden's point. No, not for the genes, but we can kind of read that layer atop, which gives us a lot of information as to how life is being lived and how the genes are expressing. Yeah, sweet. All right. Christina has our next question and is asking, how do we find our updated cheat sheet? So this is, that easy access to our genes. And I'd highly encourage you, again, we'll put this in the chat, the DNA Way app. It is meant to be exceptionally searchable, and it is meant to have capture all of that information in that cheat sheet fashion. So if you get the app, you'll be able to tap into some of that. All right. So Sheila is saying that, and this is Sheila's expressing something that's to an extent very common within sleep. Um, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I have a terrible time going back to sleep. My brain is nonstop thinking of trivial things, so kind of that hamster wheel that we talked about. Um, and so they're asking what are genes that can influence this and what can be done to support it. So, Sheila, we'll talk through a few general things, but I'd really encourage that you reach out to a provider and a practitioner because there are a lot of things that can drive that wake up point. Stress is amongst them, but there's stress isn't this kind of one variable. There's a lot that feeds into stress. And so knowing specific to you what is feeding in to create that, middle of the night wake up becomes really important. So one thing I would offer a lot of time, what is happening when people have that early wake up, they're getting that cortisol bump a little bit too early. So, we talked about that diurnal pattern. They're getting that cortisol bump a little bit too early after kind of usually it's 4-ish hours of sleep when there should be a concert of other hormones, serotonin amongst them, a few others, that should be keeping you asleep, right? And so what we want to explore is why is that coming a little bit sooner and why can't we buffer it? For some people, that's going to be hormones like estrogen and progesterone. For other people, that's going to be blood sugar dysregulation. For other people, that is going to be HPA axis dysregulation and kind of a nervous system that's a little bit too much going on. And for other people, it's inflammation and infection. So I'm not dismissing the question, audience. What I am re-emphasizing is that if you try sleep hygiene and you give it that honest effort for several weeks and you're not seeing that needle move, there's something else in body that is a bit bigger going on, and you need clinician support to investigate that. Genes are going to be part of that conversation, but there also needs to be that clinical intake. So I'd really encourage you to reach out to a provider, to us, in order to explore some of that. Explore. So close. We're going to get there, audience. You can email CEO at thednacompany.com, and Katie or Vanny will toss that into the chat for you. All right. So Deborah is saying, uh, that if your profile, genetically speaking, gives you a tendency towards anxiety and burnout, and you have a long history of some trauma and pain, especially in childhood, and we know that's exceptionally influential in how people experience stress and navigate their worlds. What can you do to shift that long-term entrenched pathway away from kind of that overactivation? Yeah. Dr. Varden? Yeah.
Well, I had read that, and honestly, I would say definitely work with someone who can
Mm.
really understand the details of your history and be more precise in different strategies for healing, for repatterning. But in general, if you are first starting off, learning about this or trying to find things to help, there's a wonderful book called The Tools by Dr. Phil Stutz and Dr. Barry Michaels. There's also another one by Your Body Keeps the Score. That's the book name, by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. But they both do bring up different type of trauma-informed mind-body practices like MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction.
Mhm.
There's also somatic therapies, trauma sensitive yoga, Feldenkrais. It's Feldenkrais. Um, these these techniques really help to discharge stored stress and retrain the body, the responses by gently building new neuronal pathways.
Mhm.
Because, like what Dr. Kosterman has already commented on a few times throughout this webinar, is that if you work that muscle so much that that becomes your default. So these are ways to help shift you out of that default.
Mhm.
There's also guided imagery, clinical hypnosis, CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, for trauma. And then obviously working in the things that we've already talked about, with sleep, rhythmic movements, exercising, anti-inflammatory nutrition, other types of repatterning for
Mhm.
stress response. So, I mean, that's kind of like a basket,
Yeah.
but I definitely would strongly encourage, working with someone for that.
Yeah, I think Deborah and everyone else on this webinar who's sitting there and saying I had a rough go of it at first, and I still feel that ingrained within my body. What Dr. Varden said, she kind of outlined all these tools, and hear them in this sense, not to overwhelm you and be like, you have to do so much, you have to do everything. Hear, though, that there's many different pathways towards healing, some that come from body, some that come from mind, some that come from spirit. And so working with a provider that can help you implement and bring in, one or two at a time to the end where as you slowly, poor health can come cut by death by a thousand cuts. We're so close. Healing is also going to be coming from that, one of a thousand steps. So it's not to overwhelm. It's just to say that there's a lot of different pathways that you can get towards healing. It's not just one way. And that's important. You can heal. That is the important piece. Yeah. All right. So thank you, Deborah, for that, because I think it's a question many people have and don't always voice. Let's see here. So Chandra, I hope I need new glasses. I can't see that far. I hope I think it's Sharda.
Sure.
Um, thank you, Sharda. Um, they're asking, uh, I think they're asking for agents, namely herbal agents or maybe amino acid agents that can be really helpful if you're not a deep sleeper. So kind of really supporting some of the deep sleep, right? Dr. Arden, I know how much you love sleep. Do you have some thoughts as to how one can really support and achieve deep sleep? And audience, Dr. Varden's going to assume that there's nothing else going on. Your hormones are good, there's no inflammation, et cetera, et cetera. She's going to assume all else is equal. Yeah.
Okay, so for deep sleep, uh, things that you want to avoid: eating a heavy meal late, okay, alcohol, those will actually negatively impact deep sleep. Um, but going to things that you can do, things that I had mentioned earlier, you want to have a consistent sleep schedule. You want to have that regular morning light exposure. And we're not talking very long, 10 to 15 minutes in bright natural light, typically within like an hour after waking up, because you really want to anchor your body clock and promote that timely melatonin secretion at night. The physical activity, the wind down routine, limiting your blue light. But not just that, uh, you want to be able to follow what you are doing and seeing how that response is, because deep sleep is when your body is doing that repair. And it's like, you can be doing all these things, but how do you really know? How do you know if you've increased your deep sleep? This is why we say test, don't guess. Track it, track it to
Mhm.
hack it. This is why we use different sleep trackers. I personally use the Aura Ring,
Mhm.
and I follow and change a few things. Or, if I do have a late meal, I see how that impacts my sleep. Or if I do have alcohol, or if I'm, a bit more stressed and, I was on the computer or doing some late night work and then trying to go to bed. I see how negative things as well as positive things can affect my deep sleep. So again, it really covers a lot of what we've already talked about, but then it's the implementation and then you personally seeing how is it affecting your deep sleep. But you need to have something in order to actually see, because there's no way that you can do it without some sort of objective biometric tracker for that. Do you have any tips that you would want to throw out that I may not have covered?
No, I like what you covered. You're very passionate about sleep, and so I value what you just said there. I think sometimes it's not the sexy advice that people want, because people want like a magic pill that is going to be like, here's some deep sleep, and unfortunately, the pathway to sleep is not sexy. It's very much based in routine and stripping out some stimulation. Yeah, so I think you gave the most sexy, non-sexy answer out there.
I love my sleep.
Yeah. All right. Madeline, I think, has our next question. And Madeline's asking, is the pineal gland involved in HPA axis as well? Um, they heard that a calcified pineal gland can cause insomnia. And do we test genes associated to it? So, pineal gland, a little bit behind the eye. Once upon a time, kind of talked about as a
Centered, it's
third
like,
eye. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And so it's important. It's not directly involved in the HPA axis, but it's very much influenced by it. Something that releases a lot of melatonin. And we know that melatonin and cortisol kind of have that opposite relationship. As one rises, it will disrupt the other. Amongst a few other things, there's a happy little network that's going on in the brain. And what I want you to take from this is that stress disrupts this network. And something we also see, this cognitive calcification as we get older. Sometimes this gland can calcify a little bit. It shows its wear and tear, and that can disrupt how we are creating our melatonin. This calcification can come from many different avenues and pathways, right? Not proper sleep, the chicken and egg sort of question, right? Chronic exposure to certain heavy metals and other poisons or toxins, aging, oxidative stress. There's a bunch of different things. So honestly, supporting your pineal gland is to an extent supporting healthy diet and lifestyle and reducing exposures. From a gene perspective, we don't look at it directly, but we do look at clock and we look at a few other genes that really influence that circadian side that really influence the pineal gland. So again, jumping into your sleep report will help elucidate how easily you are able to establish a circadian rhythm. And if you're not great at it, things that you can be doing to further support that. Yeah. All right. Sheila, yes, has a question around devices like the Apollo Neuro or the Pulsetto, asking if these devices are useful for stress reduction and support with sleep. I definitely have some opinions, Dr. Varden. Do you?
I mean, I personally haven't used either. I still
Yeah.
want to get the Apollo Neuro because there are a few people, on our staff that have it and they're
Hmm.
convincing me to get it. So, but
Hmm.
I don't have personal experience. So I would love to hear your take on
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. So audience, what these devices are is they kind of look like a watch without a clock. And they're things that you attach to your body. You quite literally just lay up against your body and it will send electrical pulses throughout body. And these pulses, you know how I talked about stress, or at least the reduction thereof, isn't something you can exclusively just think your way into. We want to look at what are signals coming into body, into brain that tell us to calm down. And so, what the Apollo Neuro, amongst other devices like this, they send that signaling, that electrical signature that tells the body, chill, you're good. you can calm down. It's, you know, we talked about death by a thousand cuts. This is one of the steps that people can take in order to calm down their nervous system so that they're better able to have that beautiful rhythm, that diurnal rhythm of cortisol amongst other neurotransmitters and brain factors. So, the evidence around these devices is pretty strong. I would say, is it going to be your fix all in the sense of if you buy this or do you have stress solved? Unfortunately, not. But I think it's one of the steps that you can be taking, especially for people who feel like they don't know where to start and they don't really have that. They need a little bit of a breath before they can start with something a little more active, like a diet change or an exercise implementation. So stamp of approval as long as you're not assuming that it is going to be fixing everything in your world. Yeah. All right. Oh, we have quite a few questions to get through here, given the time. So, audience, we'll probably go over a little bit, just to be mindful of time. But we're gonna start getting through the balance of these questions. Um, so Susan's asking, can you go over techniques that in the moment help with stress? So Dr. Varden, why don't you and I each give our favorite one?
Breathing, diaphragmatic
Mhm.
breathing, box breathing. You want to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, that vagal tone. But the breath, when you're focusing on the breath, that really helps to slow the heart rate, decreases blood pressure, and help to put you in that more calm, relaxed state.
Mhm. Yeah. I tend to do one of two things. So, if I'm very mindful of it, I tend to try and remind my brain that I have a body and that my body is safe. And so, I'll do a little bit of a body scan. So, I'll start at my feet and be like, cool, where are my toes? And slowly work my way up. Because what this does is it tells the brain that the body is actually physically safe. When I'm not able to do that, or like my body is kind of part of the stress, let's not judge. I do a little bit of math. It's distraction, but I really like math and it makes me happy. So in the moment, it calms me down.
Where it somebody else out. So
I know. I know. I once told someone that and they're like, math stresses me. And I was like, oh, I find numbers so beautiful. All right. Next question before someone calls me out for being too much of a nerd. Um, let's see. Yeah, so Carol is asking the question of can a system, can the body, can the brain um, get so stressed that it shuts down? Namely, the body kind of puts you into a state of super fatigue, many naps, hardly any resilience. How do you recover from that? Yeah, so what you're describing there, Carol, is a true burnout. And without getting into too much detail, effectively what is happening is body is saying we've actually reached a point where you're not listening to our signals of distress, right? Because this isn't going to happen overnight. This isn't going to be something that you wake up and you're burnt out. There are going to be many different signals from the body. And so, what you're detailing right now is the body getting to a point of you're not listening to me. So, I'm actually going to start down regulating you so you rest. And so, I can get into a point where I start to bring immune function back on and repair function back on. And so, I would encourage you to engage with a clinician or engage with some literature that walks through a burnout plan. Because you're to your point, it actually takes a while to recover from this. It takes a while to calm the body down and to bring nutrition amongst a few other things online, right? When we're stressed, we're not absorbing our nutrition properly. We're not leveraging our nutrition properly. We're going to be increasing inflammation, down regulating immune. There's many things. And so, working with a provider of how do you gently bring yourself online and then reestablish boundaries and patterns and habits that don't get you back to that point becomes really important. So, I'd encourage to reach out to a provider to go through that. Yeah. Um, let's see here. The next question I have is from
there's
uh
a few of them actually that have the same type of issue, and this will cover about three or four of the
yes.
questions.
Look at your S. I
So
love it.
really, really what they're saying is that their cortisol patterns are off. Okay.
Mm,
So generally they are kind of lower in the morning, how they just don't have that get up and go. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
just put the covers back over my head and go back to sleep. And it's they're higher at night, and they're having a hard time getting to sleep. And really, it's a matter of how do you shift that pattern into something more uh, more normal, that
Mm-hmm.
works for them. So I'm grouping a few of those questions. So
I value you. Thank you.
welcome. So do you want to
Oh no, please, please.
oh okay. So a lot of it is implementing a lot of what we've been talking about throughout this webinar.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, Now, when we're talking about, because a few of them were specifically on, it's still high at night. I can't get to sleep. So I'm going to focus on that just for a moment. And again, this is where you want a consistent, calming evening rituals. Having that sleep hygiene, having that natural wind down is really going to make a difference. And I'll tell you, the bright lights in the evening do not help. This is where you really want to have some red lights that you can, use in the evenings to start dimming your lights. Use some, blue light blockers. Viva Rays are wonderful. I've actually interviewed the CEO of Viva Rays, Rudy Nassif, a few times. Wonderful interviews where he talks about how it works in the system, how that lighting can affect your cortisol levels, how it can affect your ability to go to sleep. So the light and melatonin regulation is very directly impactful, especially when you're talking about being able to fall asleep at night and shifting those cortisol levels. Doing the mind body breathing exercises, calming the body, activating the parasympathetic nervous system, that vagal tone, nutrition, meal timing, gentle movement, not intense exercise. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, you know, uh, Addressing any pain, inflammation, if there's anything in particular that you're dealing with, that needs to be addressed. Hormones, okay, for those of us, in menopause, that needs to be addressed. Otherwise, it's going to be a problem. So that's really, I think, a good blanket that can cover several of those questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Varden. I value that. Um, I think the next question I see is in regards to supplements that are leveraged either to support stress or to support sleep. Should they be cycled or are they safe to take long term? Um, the answer to that is obviously if you're taking it within, a safety window, theoretically, you can take that for as long as you want. I would offer that traditionally it's not offered in kind of that blanket forevermore way. The body responds to um, the body will habituate to that herb. So I tend to like to cycle those. Traditional herbal medicines tend to cycle those over courses of about 3 weeks. Sometimes it's a bit longer, really depends on the herb and it depends on the stress in your body. So I would encourage that if you're considering adaptogens, that's the family of herbs that helps with the stress response. I'd really encourage you to work with a provider. Be that someone here through our Black Label offerings or a trained herbalist. Again, I really encourage you because I think some people think, oh, it's a plant. I can do whatever I want with it. But there's a lot of tradition and a lot of research that is embedded with how do these herbs best support us. And so I think that's always case specific. So reaching out to a provider and understanding that is really important. Yeah. Dr. Varden, did we catch all our questions now that you very beautifully kind of captured the I'm not sleeping well, I'm waking up, my cortisol's all wonked. Um,
Well, actually, Michael had made a statement. What if you got to bed late and wake up late on a regular basis? Well, if that works for you, if that's part of your routine, well, then that's fine, because then you're having that regularity and timing. But if it's not working for you, then it's starting to implement. It's easier if you start shifting your timing by, say, a half hour to an hour, doing that for a few days, and then keep shifting it until you are at a bedtime and a wake up time that you want. So
Hmm.
it's a matter of implementing these in stages, which can be very helpful. Um, and then a couple others had mentioned about it, problems with, that wake up at 3, o'clock in the morning or what have you. This could be blood sugar fluctuations. It could be other triggers, that either whether genetic, whether environmental, again, to really understand what it could be for you, I would say definitely get a session with one of us to
Hmm.
be able to take a look at your genes, to be able to find out, what's going on, and then we can be more precise in recommendations. And I think
Hmm.
outside of that, Corey had a question about the CYP1A2 gene
Hmm.
having to do with caffeine.
Hmm.
Because they said it wasn't included in the report a few years back. Has it been updated to be?
Hmm. Yeah, it will be. So, Corey, that's something that we are releasing within the next month or two through the app. So I'd encourage you to get the app because that will be where it will be updated. And we'll, I think we'll push a notification. I'm not technically inclined, but I would imagine we'll push a notification so you know that something's been updated there.
And
Yeah.
it's the same type of thing with the cry one,
Yeah.
CRY one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, have to do with circadian rhythm.
Hmm. All right, Mandel. I liked this conversation. Audience, I hope you also liked this conversation. It was nice to spend, well, stress happens, right? So it was nice to spend a little bit of time talking about how individualized it can be and how that can become a superpower as opposed to something you need to fear and assume is not going to work out very well.
Yeah, just change the context in which you have the power to do so.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. Dr. Varden, shall we do our favorite thing to mitigate? Well, my favorite thing, and I'm assuming on your
Yes, you
side.
did.
Our favorite way to mitigate stress, and audience, we encourage you to do this alongside with us. So there was a study that looked at we know exercise is really good for mental health and for stress and all the fun things. And the question was, what is the best sort of exercise to help mental health? And I'm going to offer by extension stress. Let's be honest, I'm are taking an artistic license with this study because I really love it and I just want to apply it to everything. But dance. Dancing was found to be one of the best things because it requires a lot of brain, a lot of body. And so, audience, we're going to dance out of here, and we would love it if you would dance out of here with us. So, as the audience plays, Dr. Varden, thank you so much for being here. Audience, Mason, me, we will see you next time. I think both of us tomorrow.